Well, now for a look at the property sector, which has been battered in recent times. Many listed groups have been dragged down following the Centro debacle, which we've heard so much about. Cromwell is a property fund that suffered in the fallout and has just completed a buyback in light of a softer share price. Joining me now in the studio is Cromwell Chairman Paul Weightman. Paul, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks, Brooke.
Tell us about what happened with Centro and why everyone's been affected.
Well, I think generally what's happened over the last few years is that there's been no differentiation between companies on the basis of risk. So regardless of gearing, regardless of where people have invested, regardless of the sources of income, companies have been rated generally on pretty much the same earnings ratio. Now, I think recent events and difficulties in the finance market has shown that that rating just isn't appropriate. You really have to look at the underlying source of earnings and the risks that are appropriate for companies. What's happened across the whole sector is that, and as generally happens in markets, the market swings one way, doesn't take into account appropriate risks and qualifications, swings back the other way, and everybody is pretty much affected regardless of underlying quality of earnings and underlying risks. I think generally the LPT sector has been affected that way, and the difficulty now going forward for most analysts and investors is to try and determine exactly what the quality of earnings is and what risks are involved in investing in each company.
Yeah, because always the LPTs, that's a safe haven, that's how you diversify and shore up your portfolio, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Has that changed?
That's where people go in times of market difficulty.
And has that changed then?
It's changed because LPTs aren't what they were in general. LPTs have become an amalgam of development, construction, overseas investment risk, often with very intricate and opaque investment structures. People have assumed that LPTs pretty much are what they used to be, which is bricks and mortar investment. They're not, and the challenge going forward is to work out exactly what people are investing in.
So how do you separate yourself from the bunch then and prove your worth when, as you say, if people aren't painting you with the same brush anymore? Where are the areas that you have to focus the market on? Well,
I think we've just got to explain to people that we are a simple bricks and mortar company. Very safe, very secure, low gearing, with very high quality income streams. That's the message that we've got to convince the market about. We're in a different position from a lot of LPTs now, and I think the pendulum swung in the market now from wealth creation to wealth protection. And people now really have to look at and evaluate whether the wealth that they're parking in LPTs is going to be affected by the riskier activities that a lot of these entities now undertake.
So your share price obviously suffered, well, you've suffered as a result of the Centro.
Right. I think everybody in the sector's suffered. And part of our responsibility, managing a listed company, is in capital management. Now, we're happy to raise capital when we think it's viable to do so. But similarly, when we think the market is rating us in a way that is inefficient or doesn't reflect our true value, then it's incumbent on us to take action and, as part of our capital management strategy, to buy back. And that's what we're doing now.
Yeah, so you've just done that now, you've just completed it?
Well, we've just started it actually. We've announced it just under 2 weeks ago, so we're in the market effectively from next week.
Do you see some sort of recovery on the way for the market in general?
Yeah, I think uncertainty is obviously the major problem at the moment. And as I've said, traditionally people move to safe havens in times of uncertainty. I think we're in a situation now where we're looking at a looming rate cut. The US is in very uncertain times, and you're starting to see emerging articles about difficulties in China. So, yeah, the market is spooked. Fear has set in. I think people have got to basically go back to fundamentals now and look at the basics, analyse risk and analyse quality of earnings.
So do you think Centro is the worst of a fairly good bunch, or do you think Centro is indicative of perhaps the rest of the sector? Obviously you're saying that you're a pretty good and solid company. What about the rest of them in the sector?
I think there's a whole range.
As you say, because people have to readjust their thinking about it now.
Yeah, and I think people really need to put LPTs in a continuum from high development, construction, gearing risk, back to high quality earnings with low gearing and good quality revenue streams from property. And that's going to be a process that will take a little while because, as I've said, the emphasis in recent years has been on value creation without adequate attention being given to the risks associated with producing revenue in all of these entities. That's changed now.
How do you see the interest rate decision this afternoon affecting the market and particularly the share market as well?
Look, I think the market's pretty well factored in the fact that an interest rate rise is likely, and I think what the government's trying to do is to lead inflation management through fiscal policy, and I think we're finding Australia is an amalgam of different economies. The New South Wales economy probably isn't faring as well as Queensland, isn't faring as well as Western Australia, and an interest rate rise is a sledgehammer to try and crack a walnut. What we need is some finer mechanisms to try and address inflation in each of these different sub-economies. The market, I think, will acknowledge it, it'll move on, it'll take it in its stride. I think what we're all seeing is that each rise brings us to closer to the next cycle, which is an easing of monetary policy.
And when do you see this cycle ending? When do you see the top of this raising rates cycle?
Well, we're betting that this rise is pretty close to the last one, and that we're probably going to see monetary policy easing in about June next year. June next year.
Paul Weightman, thanks very much for coming in and chatting to us today on the Business Channel. Thank you.
Pleasure.